speaker is Lieutenant General United States Air Force retired Ralph Jodice. On July 1st of 2017, Ralph became the president of the Rotary Club of Hanover. He has been a Rotarian for 3 years. Ralph served for over 36 years in the U.S. Air Force, retiring in July of 2013. Ralph was a career fighter pilot with over 3,500 flight hours in the following aircraft: F-111 A&E, F-15E, T-38B, and the UH-1N. He served in multiple assignments in the U.S. and in England, South Korea, China, and Turkey. He's had the honor and privilege to command 6 times in the Air Force at multiple levels. He was a fighter squadron commander, a fighter group commander, a wing commander, the commander of the Air Force District of Washington, D.C., the commander of NATO's Allied Air Command Izmir, Turkey, and the Combined Forces Air Component Commander for NATO's Operation Unified Protector. Ralph has had 2 assignments in the Pentagon. His assignment in China was at the American Embassy in Beijing, where he was the defense attaché, and he can still even speak a little bit of Chinese. Ralph has a bachelor and a master's degree in aerospace engineering. He also has a master's degree in national strategic studies. Currently, Ralph serves as a senior mentor for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is known as NATO. He is one of 13 retired generals and admirals from 7 different countries who advise senior NATO commanders and their staffs for high-level exercises and specific training events. This is a part-time job for Ralph, which takes him to Europe 30 to 50 days per year. During his Air Force career, Ralph had 3 assignments either associated with or directly assigned to NATO in both peacetime and combat situations. Therefore, you can see why today Ralph is going to brief us on NATO, or as he likes to refer to it, NATO 101. Ralph and his wife Judy moved to Hanover in early 2014. They have 3 sons who all have been married and collectively have blessed them with 5 wonderful grandchildren. Ralph and Judy can easily be spotted on the back roads around the area riding their tandem bicycle. They also like to travel. Since retiring, they've been to Slovakia, France, Iceland, New Zealand, Sweden, and Antarctica. Ralph, you do know I work at a travel agency, right? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to our Rotary Club the president of the Hanover Rotary Club, Lieutenant General Ralph Jodice.
Yeah, I feel pretty embarrassed. I guess I'm going to have to be calling Courtney now for the next trip. Well, it's really an honor and a privilege to be with you all here today, and for many different reasons. One, to talk with you about NATO, and of course, as a fellow Rotarian, and the joint Guy here as a brand new president of our club there in Hanover. Di and I have had the opportunity to meet in this past spring multiple times, going through president-elect training and other training and district conferences and all those other kind of things, of course, that many of you know that you have to do. So it's great to be with you all here today, and also to see some familiar faces. Aaron, I'm glad that I did not have to lead the song, because you don't want to hear me sing songs, and most of the songs I know are fighter pilot songs, which are probably not. It's like this, so anyway. But it is really an honor and privilege to be with you and to spend this time to talk with you about NATO. And I got to tell you, the best word on that slide up there, retired. Right? For those of you that are, and those of you that still work is way overrated. And my wife and I have been trying to live by our mantra of we're doing our best not to flunk retirement, and trying to get around, as you heard, traveling around many interesting places in the world, chasing around our grandchildren. In fact, I left my wife with our almost 6-year-old granddaughter and her sister who's almost 2-year-old. You know, in the flying community, we talk about when you go out and you fly air-to-air combat, flying 1v1 or 2v2. Well, I left her doing 2v1, and that's not a good situation to be in, especially with the 2-year-old, who's sort of a little bit of a wrecking ball right now. But today I'm going to talk to you about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to get out from behind the podium because those are scary places to stand. Your knees shake. You grab the side of this podium, you get splinters in your hand. But this is a way that I can get out here, and I can also make sure that you stay awake. All right, and also I can make sure that I stay on time. But here's what we're gonna talk about. And as Courtney appropriately introduced me and went through some of the things in the bio, I've been a senior mentor now here for NATO. I'm in the middle of my 3rd year. And normally we do about 6 years, and you'll see some of that information here a little bit later on. If you want to ask me a question, we have a slide up. You can ask me at that point. If you want to wait to the end, that's okay. If you want to ask me about any of my other assignments, if you want to ask me about my time in China, I'd be happy to give you some views and opinions about that. If you want to ask me about anything having to do with our United States military, or if you want to ask me about the Rotary Club of Hanover, which is a great organization, and if you want to come and visit us, come visit us sometime. Yes, that is a paid political announcement. But we've got a great club, as John well knows, and again, we're working real hard to do a lot of the same things that you all are doing. And of course, a couple things I see around here today, I'm going to steal and take them back with me, guys. That's the perfect sign of flattery. So here's what we're going to do, and here's the things that we'll go ahead and talk about. So what does NATO stand for? No action, talk only? That's what some people in NATO say, or nothing after 2 o'clock, because everybody's going on coffee break or they're going home. But no, as we all know, it stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, when we look at the map here, of course, covers a large part of Europe, but of course it also covers over into North America. The treaty was signed in 1949, and of course it came out of World War II. And it came out of when Russia started to form the Soviet Union and started to gobble up, no kidding, gobble up parts of Eastern Europe. And the rest of Western Europe, to include the United States and of course the UK and Canada, looked at it and said, we have to have some counter for that in what we call a collective security arrangement. So 12 countries initially started up the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and those 12 countries from that expanded 6 different times. And you can see the dates when they expanded and the number of countries that were added. You'll see here in the next slide that in 1999, in 2004, and then in 2009, that's when a lot of the former Eastern Bloc, okay, Eastern European nations that were part of the Soviet Union joined the alliance. Okay? And we can talk about some of those reasons a little bit later. There's one more on the way, coming up pretty soon, and that's Montenegro, okay, which is a small country, used to be part of the former Yugoslavia. Montenegro has been invited to join the alliance, and if someone wants to ask, I'll be happy to tell you that whole process about what it takes to become a member of the alliance. The alliance uses 2 official languages, English and French, but I would tell you that everybody speaks English as the common language that is used. However, many documents that come out of the headquarters will be written in both different languages. Okay? And that was just what was agreed to at the time. And if you think back to 1949, what did many people speak in Europe? And mostly, probably a lot of them spoke French. And then, of course, a lot English, and then throughout the years, English has become more of the common language that's used throughout the alliance. And if you're interested, if you go to that website, all right, just www.nato.int, and the .int is for international. If you go there, you can find a whole host of material about the alliance. You can see some of the things that are currently going on. There's some neat pictures on there. There's public affairs information. It's just like any other website. There's probably a link to a Facebook page that you could like, and you can do just like you did here. There's probably Twitter. There's all kinds of stuff. But so that's where you can find if you want any more information about the alliance. So these are the countries in the alliance. So how does the alliance decide to put the countries in what order? Well, everything's in alphabetical order, and mostly everything's in English alphabetical order. Sometimes they use French alphabetical order. If they use English alphabetical order, the United States is always last. If they use if they use French alphabetical order, we wind up falling in the middle somewhere. And someone who knows French can probably say that way better than me, and I'm not even going to attempt to say. What is it? Yes, there we go, that was it. All right. But you can see when the different countries join the alliance. I tried to group them by color. I don't have a staff anymore. I'm this staff of 1, and my wife kind of makes it a staff of 2. She's probably more the staff of 1, and I'm like the anchor there of that staff. But if I could figure out how to build that slide, I would. But you can see the different dates when the countries came in. And like I said, the ones here in 1999, Czech Republic being one of them, Poland being another one, and Hungary. You can see that those are some of the nations, again, former Eastern Bloc, former Soviet Union countries that decided that joined the alliance at that point in time. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it's a process. A nation just doesn't raise its hand and say, yeah, I want to join, and they come in with their 20 bucks, you know, and they put their money on the table and they become members. It's a process that takes a number of years. The nation needs to be invited by the alliance, and then they have to meet certain criteria to be able to join the alliance, both militarily and from a political standpoint. One of the things that you've seen in the news that was spoken a lot throughout the presidential campaigns, and of course early on by President Trump, was that every member must pay their fair share. All right? And the fair share for every member of the alliance is 2% of their gross domestic product has to be dedicated to their national defense. Okay? Not every nation is doing that. Right? But that's part of the criteria. So again, getting Montenegro on, they need to be able to do that. And not every one of these nations, of course, have big defense, big defense in different branches of their service. Some have none, like Iceland, for example. They have about the equivalent of a Coast Guard. Okay? So that's part of the region of the alliance. We'll talk about that. So what does NATO do? It's a political and military alliance. There's 28 members total from Europe and, of course, North America, meaning the only two out of North America is the United States and Canada. It's a cooperation in security and defense. I did not spell defense wrong. Yes, I'm a fighter pilot, and I'm an engineer by trade, and my spelling skills stink, but that's the way the Brits spell defense. And when we use English, right, Pat? Right? Yeah, right. And when we use English, the written English that's used in the alliance, it's British English. And there's a difference between British English and American English, all right? And the Brits will appropriately point that out to you, all right? Especially to us, especially to somebody like me. What's very important for the alliance is what's called the transatlantic link. That link between North America and Europe, between the United States and Canada and the rest of Europe. As we know, both of those nations, our nation and Canada, of course, has big links, of course, to Europe, as many of us and many of our families came from there, and from, of course, many places around the world. But that transatlantic link for political and for security cooperation remains very, very strong. And part of that collective security is what NATO calls Article 5. And Article 5, I call it the Three Musketeer Clause. And that's basically an attack against one is considered to be an attack against all. When we were attacked on 9/11, NATO invoked Article 5. It doesn't happen all the time. Back when Syria started, back in 2011, and around the 2011-2012 time period, there was discussions when Turkey asked to invoke Article 5 because of situations regarding Syria. There's been discussions when nations have been attacked by other terrorist activities, whether it's been Belgium or the UK, whether that nation might invoke Article 5 or request Article 5. So the alliance in the political realm will talk about that first before they decide to do that. And when the alliance did invoke Article 5 after 9/11, they helped support the United States by flying over NATO airborne early warning and control aircraft to help patrol our skies with airborne early warning to make sure that we were not going to be attacked again. So that's an example how Article 5 could work. Another example could be, right, and I'm going to pick on Russia, if Russia decided to attack Poland, or Russia decided to attack into the Baltics, which is a very big area of concern right now. If they went into the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia are all members of the alliance. And I would bet these stars on them that the alliance would invoke Article 5 because they'd have to. Because the territorial integrity of the alliance would be compromised. And that's what Article 5 is all about. So how does NATO work politically? And when you see the flags shown there, the alliance, again, those flags will be in alphabetical order. And this first one here is Albania. And it goes around that way, and of course the last one there being the United States. Why those flags at half-mast, and where is that? That's at NATO headquarters, which is in Brussels, all right? And they're at half-mast because there probably has been someone within the alliance who was killed, maybe in Afghanistan, and they put the flags at half-mast just like we would. Yes, sir?
But is Article 5 automatic?
No, it's not automatic.
Opt out.
The way they, I don't have the exact words, but the words are something like, all members of the alliance should consider, supporting Article 5, so they don't have to. More than likely, the nations would all support it, but that doesn't mean that they would put military men and women and equipment to it. They just might support it politically, but they might decide not to support it militarily. It would be up to the political will of the nation. It would depend on the situation. Does that answer
So
your
if
question?
something we decided to do, we basically have to sell it to the rest of NATO.
That's right. If there was something that occurred that a nation or a couple nations thought that Article 5 should be invoked, then they would have to work with the rest of the nations to make that happen. I'm going to talk a little bit about reaching consensus and what that means, and maybe that'll get a little bit more of your question. So how does NATO work politically? Each country has a permanent delegation that's there at the NATO headquarters in Brussels. And that delegation is normally made up, it's an ambassador who has a political staff. And so our person who's there from the United States right now, that's an ambassadorial position. They're appointed by the President of the United States. And then within that, they make up what's called the North Atlantic Council. The North Atlantic Council is the political body of NATO. They make the political decisions at the NATO level. And again, organization, a little more Brit spelling going on there. The NATO Secretary General rotates some, it's not between specific countries, but is nominated, and it's normally not going to be somebody from a big country. The United States, Great Britain, France probably, Germany would probably never have the Secretary General position. Before, the gentleman from Norway, the previous Secretary General, was from Denmark. Okay? So it's normally going to probably be a mid-level type country that's going to hold that position. When I say decisions are made by consensus, what does consensus mean? Consensus doesn't mean I'm going to risk doing math in public, okay, which is something you should never do. It's not that out of the 28 nations, 15 raise their hand and say, yes, let's go do it. No, consensus means not saying no. So if the alliance is going to make a decision, let's say, to do a certain operation, it goes out under what's called silence procedures. They send out, it's like a decision sheet, says here's what we want to do, and there's been discussions beforehand, so this has not just happened blindsided. And they send this out, and it goes out under silence. So if you say nothing, it's okay. It doesn't mean you say yes, it just means you're not saying no. And if you do say no, then you break silence, and then you have to say why you're breaking silence, and then further discussions will take place to try to reach that consensus. So sometimes it takes the alliance a little bit of time to get to consensus. But normally when it does, it's in such a position, it's something that is amenable to everybody. Does that mean it's watered down? Sometimes it could be, but sometimes it's a position that all nations could get behind politically, and it's something that is that their nations will support, from either their president to their prime minister to their parliament. So consensus is not saying no. Then within the alliance is also the military committee. The military committee is just that. They're 2 and 3 stars, admirals or generals. They're at the NATO headquarters, and they advise the North Atlantic Council, the political body, about the military capabilities that are resting within the alliance. They don't do operational planning. They advise more from, again, an advisory position, and advise those ambassadors about what type of military capabilities are out there. So how does NATO work militarily? First, there's SHAPE headquarters in Mons, Belgium. And SHAPE is Supreme Headquarters, Allies-Powered Europe. And that's the home of Allied Air Command. And in fact, when I have my NATO Senior Mentor Conference in October, that's where we normally have our conference there, because that's the operational side of the alliance. The Supreme Allied Commander, also known as a SACIR, how's that for a title? Supreme Allied Commander, boy, it doesn't get better than that. He's always an American. It's a 4-star position. Right now we have an Army general there. Before that it was a Navy Admiral, Admiral Stavridis, and when I was a NATO commander I had the privilege to be under Admiral Stavridis. First time we ever had a Navy Admiral there, but it's always an American position. The deputy is always a Brit, and the chief of staff is always a German. The rest of the positions normally rotate amongst the different countries. There's 2 joint headquarters, one in Brunssum in the Netherlands and the other one in Naples, Italy. And those joint headquarters would oversee joint operations, either things that are going on today or plan for other joint operations that the Alliance might look at taking on. When I do my senior mentor work, some of the people that we advise and mentor are at that level. Normally the 4 stars take care of those guys, and then there's headquarters underneath them that we wind up mentoring. So like the air headquarters, I'm primarily one of the air senior mentors. There's a French retired 3-star general from the French Air Force. He and I are the 2 primary air guys. And we would advise that commander and his staff for exercises and training events. Allied Command Transformation, which basically handles all the training aspects of the Alliance, is in Norfolk here in the United States. And they're responsible for NATO training and exercises. And as a senior mentor, those are the people who we technically work for. We're kind of like contractors. We sign a contract for each event that we do, and we get paid accordingly based on that. And the great thing for me is I get paid by NATO, and I don't get paid by the United States. I still have to pay taxes, but the good thing is I don't have to file a financial disclosure form with Congress, which is that's a big pain in the neck. And I had to do that when I was on active duty all the time. So what do we do as senior mentors? As Courtney said, there's 13 of us from 7 different countries. There's the countries that we're from. 2 of us are Americans, and the positions are not wedded to a country. You're nominated by your service. We're all retired admirals and generals. That's sort of the breakdown of who we have. We do 5-year tenure with normally a 1-year extension. And again, we mentor the senior NATO commanders and their staffs for exercises and training events. Back in late March, early April, I was at the Joint Warfare Center for NATO, which is up in Norway, in Stavanger, Norway. And I was, myself and another senior mentor, we mentored a Dutch Army 3-star and his staff as their headquarters certified to be a potential headquarters for a small, what NATO calls a small joint operation land focused. And we were part of that exercise. I'll do one in November where I'll be at the air headquarters for NATO, which is in Germany, and I will mentor that commander and his staff for a 1.5 week long exercise. Talked about that, and darn the luck, these 3 to 5 events every year, I got to go to Europe, and I got to drink Belgian beer or German beer or stuff like that. We don't do any real world activities, which you might say, well, why not? Okay, why don't you do any real world stuff? Well, there might be, they don't want to get us involved with decisions that really rest with life and death situations. Those are up to the current commanders. When I was a commander leading during that Operation Unified Protector, which Courtney mentioned, that was when NATO did the operation with regards to Libya in 2011, and I was the air component commander for that. I tried to get my mentor to come and spend a little time with me. It's like, Wally, come on over. He's an American, that's the guy I replaced. Come on over, I'd love to have you just kind of look over my shoulder for a little bit. But the Alliance doesn't do that. Didn't mean I couldn't talk to him on the phone and things, but it's just the way the Alliance decides to work those activities. We have our annual conference, as I mentioned already. Those are the things that we kind of look at. I said we drink Belgian beer. NATO also has partnerships. All right, their Partnership for Peace program, which grew out of the Cold War. So countries that are in part of that Partnership for Peace are countries like the Ukraine, all right, for example, is a country that was in part of that. And other countries like Sweden, Finland, and you see some of those listed up there. And you take a country like Sweden and Finland, boy, they're almost part of NATO, but politically they just don't want to do that, okay? But yet we have very close cooperation with them. I was on a course for Sweden, which I was a senior mentor up there for them. And they all have great capabilities. But they all know they can't do it by themselves. NATO has what's called the Mediterranean Dialogue, which is a regional security dialogue that includes these countries that are kind of around the Mediterranean area. And when we did the Libya operation back in 2011, Jordan was one of those countries that was part of the operation. Sweden joined in from the Partnership for Peace. And then the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, which is a bilateral security cooperation, has these countries in it, and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates participated in the operation in 2011. So that shows that NATO's partnership, these partnership programs were actually put into effect and worked out pretty well. This is in 2011. This is towards the end of the operation when we were doing that operation with regard to Libya. This is in Poggio, Renatico, Italy. And we operated out of these little porta cabins. Let me tell you, there's nothing Gucci about the stuff that we had there. But the real thing that made that whole thing work, it's the people. And when you look there, there's a lot of smiling faces, and you got people in different uniforms from different countries, and they all came together for a common goal and worked together. One of the challenges of doing that in the alliance is understanding that political will of the nations and what the nation is willing to do from a political perspective, what allowed them to have the consensus. But in the end, it's all about people. It's just like us here at our Rotary Club. Right? How do we get stuff done? We get it done with our people. You know, Rotary International talks about how the heart and soul of Rotary rests with its clubs. But where is the heart and soul of the clubs? It's with the people and it's with the committees, right, that get the work done. And it's the same thing here. It was these folks who came up with great ideas. Sometimes they came up with ideas and they bring to me and I go, that's freaking dumb and dirt. We're not doing that. Or sometimes they go, okay, that's pretty interesting. How can we make that happen? So working with people, getting them to be able to do the things that you need to be able to do, knowing the people, inspiring them, being all part of that is all part of the great things. And part of that, when I look back on my time in the Air Force and having those opportunities to command, it's all about that. Those are the great memories that make me feel good, is having been involved with people from all over the world in many different places and still am today, and being able to try to continue to make things better. And that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about being a NATO senior mentor. Keep trying to move the alliance forward the best we can underneath the current state of affairs in which we're dealing with. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of that. So that's my presentation for today. Di did not stand up, so she hadn't come up with the hook yet. So let's see what we got for questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple. One is, why is Mexico not a part of NATO? And the other question is, I get the impression that the culture is collegial. Is that?
Yes. First, why is Mexico not part of NATO? I think it probably goes back to when you look at who fought in World War II, you know, and where were things threatened. And so Mexico, I'm not saying Mexico didn't, I can't tell you if they did have anybody, but probably not. So that strong transatlantic alliance, or that strong transatlantic link, really rests with the United States, Canada, and then with those countries in Europe. And so, again, what was being threatened at the time? It was the rest of the sovereignty of Europe as again, the Soviet Union started expanding. And of course, having come out of World War II, the United States and Canada played critical roles. It became a natural. Now, NATO does have continuing dialogue with other countries. For example, we have a very close relationship with Australia. But is Australia ever going to join the alliance? No, because they're on opposite sides of the world. So it's just not right for Mexico. And then the second question was about being collegial. It is very collegial. There's a lot of work that's done in the alliance, not in meetings. Okay, what we call sidebars, you know. And I mean, how many of you probably in your work and other places, whether it's over dinner or it's over a drink or it's just over, hey, come here, I need to speak with you. And so it tends to be very collegial. When it does get emotional, the alliance tries not to go there, because then things just don't work. Okay, and you got to have this constant dialogue. Because remember, you're dealing with people from different cultures. And it's not just about the language. Okay, languages might be different, but cultures are different. Even though European cultures are close to the same, they're not. Right? There's little cartoons that float around NATO about the 28 different nations and what they're all like, and they poke fun at every one of them. You know, like the Turk is depicted as very strict, very rigid. You know, it's black or it's white. You know, it's got to be this way. And then us Americans, you know, we're all over the place at sometimes. And of course, then they show the Italians drinking espresso coffee all the time. You know, so it is collegial, but all the nations recognize that it takes that constant dialogue and constant discussion to understand each other and then come to that consensus. Yes, sir.
First of all, General, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I'm curious as to the position past and present of NATO with respect to Ukraine. Ukraine is a member of NATO, and I see a lot of difficulty.
Right. The Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Ukraine belongs to the Partnership for Peace program. So as a partnership for peace, it's a partner. They're not in NATO. So a few years ago, almost 4 years ago, when Russia started its excursions into the Ukraine, of course, NATO became very, very concerned because, okay, now if they get into the Ukraine, what's next? All right? And NATO has enjoyed a very close relationship. We've had exercises in the Ukraine. We've done training with the Ukrainians. We've tried to get them better in their military capability, knowing the potential threat with Russia, of course, on their eastern doorstep. And so the alliance has done the best that it could and has tried to walk this fine line of it being a sovereign nation, not being part of the alliance. Underneath Partnership for Peace, there's no treaty obligations. The 28 members of the alliance have a treaty obligation. We've signed a treaty. Just like we have an alliance with South Korea, just like we have an alliance with Japan. We've signed a treaty with Ukraine. We haven't. So we do the best to try to support them where we could. But there was not consensus within the alliance about do we send military capability in there to try to fight off Russia. And again, that would take a lot of discussions to see whether they would ever get to that point. And obviously, we never did reach that point. Yes, sir.
What percentage of the NATO budget does the United States pay?
Each nation, again, is supposed to. Yeah, and and my short answer is I don't know that answer. Okay? But one of the things that, again, the president has said, and before him, Secretary Gates, and really almost every president in the last probably 20 years has said, but not as openly as President Trump has said each member of the alliance has to pay their fair share. It's called burden sharing. Okay? So based on the size and your participation in the alliance, that determines how much of the budget you pay for. We're not 50%, but we're the highest. Okay, and of course, a country like Latvia or Estonia, they're going to be much less. And not every nation, and since I know airplanes, not every nation is going to fly F-35s or the Eurofighter. But those smaller nations need to provide some other capabilities. Estonia, for example, they got cyber attacked. I want to say it was in 2006. Russia almost brought the entire country down. They now host the NATO Cyber Center for Excellence. So that's what NATO wants when they talk about burden sharing. Okay? Guy standing up. One more question before I get the hook. All right, sir, we'll go over here.
Anything going on with Japan and South Korea as far as North Korea is concerned?
As far as I know, and I don't have any inside baseball trading secrets, okay, and I'm not making that up, but in that regard, as I said, we do have a treaty obligation, an alliance obligation to Japan. We have one to South Korea. As three nations, South Korea, Japan, United States, we work very closely together, obviously, in recognizing that potential threat from North Korea, and it has significantly grown in the last few years with some of their capabilities. And it has all three nations very concerned, especially those two nations, since they're much, much closer than we are. We exercise regularly together. We train regularly together. We obviously have exchange programs together to make sure that we keep that dialogue. And I will tell you, too, the United States, I know from my time in China, tries to keep a very open dialogue with the Chinese about this, because the Chinese don't have as much influence as they used to on North Korea, but they also can have some influence, too. So constantly dialogue going on, exercises. We still have Army, Navy, and Air Force people assigned in South Korea that are there, and obviously in Japan, too. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your attention. Thanks for listening.